Scoundrels, Rascals, and Cutthroats Part 2. If you have not seen Part 1, that's perfectly okay. There's no connection between Part 1 and Part 2, except that I am the presenter for both ones. I did want to thank a couple people in the Scottsdale Police Department, several of the retired detectives that spoke to me, some of the retired detectives like Dennis Borkenhagen and Scott Reed, and then some current officers like Ron Lugay, Hugh Lockerbie, Scott Pop. They all spoke to me and helped me understand different things about some of these different cases. The investigations unit, especially the violent crimes unit, really helped me with a lot of this research. The photo lab got me some of the photos. And also you see in the picture of me on the right, that's me on a light board looking at negatives. Now we're doing this, recording this for posterity. So let me explain that back before cell phone cameras, you used to have to take a picture with film. And when you got them printed out, you got the photos and you got the negatives, and you'd use the negatives if you want to have more photos made. These are the negatives that I'm looking at a light board in the Scottsdale Police Department's photo lab, selecting which pictures we're going to use in this presentation. And then Doug Williams, one of our photographers, made those pictures available to me. So thank you to Doug and thank you to the photo lab. Property and Evidence helped me out with getting some of the photo lineups from way back. And the Public Information Office, as far as releasing all these, all the information and records, got me the police reports that I've read. When I was about to do this first class on March 20th in the year 2019, a day before, I got a phone call from a lady who's asked me, what is the purpose of this presentation? Now, I interpret it as what is the purpose of neighborhood college? So I was explaining to this lady that we started as a program over 20 years ago, teaching Homeowners Association boards of directors how to be better boards of directors. And she said, no, this particular presentation, is this some sort of true crime club who likes to watch macabre stories? And I said, no. And I thought about it for a second. And then I said to her what I'm about to say to you. The purpose of this presentation is to honor and remember the victims and their part in Scottsdale's history. And that's really what we're trying to do with this presentation. And the lady who was asking me that question was the sister of this gentleman right here, Todd Bogers. She talked to me for several times after that, and I was able to find some additional information that I can share with you today as part of that presentation. So the first case is called Don't Ever Walk Off with John Benson Alone. This story had a particular relevancy for me because the victim, Greg Holman, is 4 months younger than me. And when I think of him being murdered at the age of 14 and all the things he could have contributed to his family, to his friends, and to society, it made me sad. But I'll also tell you there was kind of a funny moment when I was showing this to my adult son, and I showed him this photo and I said, not only did this remind me, kind of resonate with me because he was my age, but also I said, we have the same haircut. And my son looked at me and he said, you know you're bald, right, Dad? I said, yeah, I know I'm bald now, but I'm talking about then in 1978. I had a part down the center and the feathered hair. I wasn't always bald. I think my son is waiting for photographic evidence to prove that. Scottsdale, we know what it's today, right? Population about 250,000, 184 square miles. It's 31 miles long and about 11.4 miles wide at its widest part. You know, I run other programs for the city of Scottsdale, and sometimes someone will call me and I say, well, what part of the city are you in? And they'll say, oh, I live in North Scottsdale. I'll say, oh, give me the name of your subdivision or tell me what your cross streets are. And they'll say, well, I live in McCormick Ranch. And I'll say, McCormick Ranch? McCormick Ranch is located around here. So north of what, Tempe, Old Town? But what I want you to look at this is showing the dividing line of Scottsdale, or the halfway mark is Deer Valley. It's actually Pinnacle Peak, but it certainly looks that way on this map. And our current mayor is David Ortega, and he was elected in November and he was sworn in January. So for 1 month, he's been our mayor. So we know what Scottsdale is like today. Again, focus on Deer Valley. That's the line that I want you to see. And now we're going to go back into time and look at this in 1978. So you see in 1978, the northern border of Scottsdale was Deer Valley Road, that same part that's in the halfway part. Scottsdale's population was about 80,000 people in 1978, and it's 80 square miles, less than half of the present size it is today. The mayor in 1978 is William Jenkins, and he was a popular mayor who took over for Bud Timms, who stepped down in 1974. And towards the end of his first elected term, it was getting like 1979, people wanted Councilman Herb Drinkwater to run for mayor, but Councilman Drinkwater said he would not run for mayor as long as William Jenkins was mayor because he liked and respected William Jenkins too much. When Mayor Jenkins announced that he would not seek re-election, Drinkwater ran and was elected as mayor. And then he was elected again and again and again and again, actually 4 times, which is, now we have term limits, but back then there were no term limits. And I believe Herb Drinkwater could still get reelected today. He was just such an incredible person. He died, unfortunately, in 1998 at the very young age of 61. So that's Scottsdale in 1978. Let's take a look at policing in 1978. This is a picture some of you will remember from the presentation, Scottsdale Behind the Photos. This is Officer Don Reardon, badge 134, in front of a 1975 Brooklyn SV1. And that's this photo was taken about 1976. Officer Reardon had a gun, a 6-shooter. This was before Glocks. He had handcuffs, mace, flashlight, and a radio. And don't forget the dreaded ticket book. Now let's compare him to what a police officer looks like and has as his equipment today. First off, notice that Officer Reardon is wearing the tan uniform of his day. Today, of course, it's a navy blue. And this is Officer Fernandez Cafati, badge 1,476. This was taken on February 21st, 2019, right off of Carefree Highway in Scottsdale, when the day after it had snowed. And yes, he really was wearing short sleeves. This is not a Photoshop picture. This really was him. But look at all the different things. First off, he's wearing a ballistic vest, which Officer Reardon wouldn't even imagine because the ballistic vest of his day would be so thick and heavy, you wouldn't be able to carry them all day, especially not in the summertime with the extra heat. But Officer Fernandez Cafati has his Kevlar ballistic vest. He has an on-body camera. He has a taser. He has Narcan, which is the medication given for opioid overdoses. He has a tourniquet. He has a cell phone, of course, and all these things that an officer in the 70s wouldn't have. They still have the dreaded ticket book, one for moving violations and one for parking ticket. And now I want to give you some cultural touchstones, because a lot of people will remember things based on the movies they went to, the TV shows, or the songs that they were listening to. So the winner of the 1978 Best Picture was Deer Hunter, which beat out Coming Home, Heaven Can Wait, Midnight Express, and An Unmarried Woman. The #1 television show was Laverne and Shirley, a spin-off from Happy Days, but it beat the Happy Days, which had been the #1 show before Laverne and Shirley. It also beat Three's Company, 60 Minutes, Charlie's Angels, and All in the Family. The #1 song that week that we're about to talk about is May 6, 1978, was the song Kiss You All Over by Exile. It had just beat out Boogie Oogie Oogie by Taste of Honey that had been on the #1 spot for the previous 3 weeks, and before that was Grease by Frankie Valli. Now this case is going to seem a lot like a Columbo episode, and Columbo was on at this time because rather than a whodunit, it was a how do you catch them? All the detectives knew who did it, who committed the murder. And in Columbo, you knew who did it before the first commercial, but it took the rest of the episode for Columbo to catch the criminal. And this one is very similar. The first detective knew, it took almost 30 years to catch him. In October 1978, 14-year-old Greg Holman went missing. After he disappeared, his mother found a note in his dresser that said, "Don't go looking for me. I have to get out of the house for a while, not very long, because I don't want to cause any more trouble around the house. So don't go looking for me, please. And please don't call the police. Then I'll get very mad. Trust me, Mom, I will be back. Love, Greg." Now, his mother believed the note was actually written the previous weekend because there had been an incident with Greg's stepfather had occurred, but nothing had happened during this time. But the responding police officer marked the case as a missing runaway. The mom was upset about this, went back to the police department a couple days later after she had called all the friends and realized he was not coming back, he was missing, and asked for a detective to be assigned. Now, Greg attended this high school right here, Saguaro High School. He was a freshman. This is Hayden Road, running north and south. This is McDonald Drive. Over here, past Pima would be the 101 freeway, but it hasn't been built yet, of course. So this is where he was a freshman. He was well-liked. He had a lot of friends. And a group of his friends used to hang out right over here at Agua Linda Park. And they gave themselves the name, the Granite Reefers. There was one guy, and then the last day that he was seen was a Sunday night. He was all together with a group of his friends, including his girlfriend, and a guy approached them who wasn't really one of their friends, but he was known to them. His name was John Benson, and he liked to wear a top hat and he liked to wear a cape, and he called himself Captain Outrageous. And he approached the friends and he said, "Hey, who wants to party with me?" And most of them said, "No, we don't want to party with you." But Greg said, "Yeah, I'll party with you." And he went walking off with John Benson, and he left his bicycle at the park, and the bicycle was found the next day still at the park. Now, I went looking for a photo of John Benson. I could not find one of him. I checked the yearbooks in the schools, that Saguaro High School. He wasn't in any of those pictures. This one photo was actually shared with me by the sergeant of the Violent Crimes Unit, who had this picture because it's a booking photo for John Benson. In 1979, he was caught damaging with a couple of friends a sign at the Kiva, at that time it was called the Kiva Craft Center, now it's called the Kiva Center on Fifth Avenue and Craftsman Court. So that's the one photo that I have of John Benson at this time. And now, if you don't mind, it's time for a little planned tangent. Because 1978, we're talking about before the Missing Children's Act of 1982. So a police department would set up a policy of when they would take a missing persons report. Some would require 2 days or 3 days that the child had to be missing before they would take the report. And that's because most children who go missing are runaways who return or in custody disputes between parents. This all changed with the death of Adam Walsh, who was missing after July 27, 1981. And because of him going missing and then found dead, his father, John Walsh, lobbied to get the Missing Children's Act passed through Congress. And he also lobbied to get the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to be created, which is still around to this day, a wonderful organization who's always looking for missing children. He did not stop there. Adam's father, John Walsh, became the host of America's Most Wanted for close to 20 years. So Greg's mom complains to the police department. A detective is assigned, and it's Detective Dennis Borkenhagen, badge number 170. Now, Detective Borkenhagen was very busy at this time with another very big case, but he did do his investigation. He was checked out all of Greg's friends. He interviewed them. And they heard stories of Greg and a friend jumping John Benson the week prior when apparently John was drunk, and they took some money out of his wallet. And supposedly, John Benson said he was going to get even with Greg and this guy. So they interviewed all the friends, and then finally he said he wanted to interview John Benson. He felt John was being deceptive, so he asked John to do a polygraph. John took the polygraph, and it was found that he was not being altogether truthful in his answers, especially if he knew anything about Greg's whereabouts. So at that point, John Benson becomes the primary suspect. The other thing that Detective Borkenhagen did was there was a lot of rumors about these forts that were located on the Indian reservation, the Salt River Pima Maricopa County Indian community, just east of Pima Road. So this is the area that John Benson lived in at the time. So it was felt, again, this is Indian Bend Road, Hayden, Pima, no 101 Freeway. This is the Indian reservation, no pavilions at this point. So they figured that if they searched in that area, they might have a good chance of finding the fort where it was rumored that Greg Holman's body could be found. Detective Borkenhagen asked the youth patrol, which today we call the Scottsdale Police Cadets, to go and search the area with him. They searched and they were unable to find anything. So with no further leads and a very big pressing case, this one became a cold case. The pressing case was June 29th, 1978. Hogan's hero star Bob Crane was found murdered in a Scottsdale townhome, and all the detectives were assigned to this high-profile case. There were no clues that Greg was murdered at this point. No one had found the body. No one had any idea where he was. It still was a chance he was a runaway. So the case was made a missing child. Around 1981, Detective Frank Hilton took over the case. He was badge number 208. And he re-interviewed all of Greg's friends, and he confronted John Benson. He was trying to rattle John Benson. He said, would you swear on the Holy Bible that you have no idea what happened to Greg? And John Benson said, yeah, I'd do that. And Frank Hilton said, then you lie and God will strike you dead. Again, he's trying to rattle him. And John Benson said, I don't have to listen to this. And he got up and left the interview. But there was still, he had no body, he had no murder weapon, there was no evidence. So once again, it becomes a cold case. Around 1986, an anonymous tip was called into Phoenix Silent Witness about Greg Holman. It said that his body was buried behind a Circle K store at Pima and Indian Bend on the Salt River Reservation. So Detective Cipriano and Myers searched, and they found an underground fort, but there was no body in it. Once again, the case became a cold case. In 1992, Greg's sister called the supervisor of the Violent Crimes Unit, Sergeant Krasnowski, badge number 299, and said that they were particularly frustrated because Greg's mother, Shirley, had died, but she died never knowing what happened to her son. And she was talking, and while she was on the phone with Sergeant Krasnowski, she had one of her brothers there, and the brother said, and she said, why did the police never check out the fort that John Benson had in his backyard? And Sergeant Krasnowski said, we have no indication there ever was a fort. No one ever told us about a fort. So they drew up a quick little drawing of what they had heard. There was a tennis court. Then over here, this area was this dug 6 feet down. It was dug apparently by a backhoe. And they had this area for this fort. So detectives Barry Vassell and Nelson Lepan were assigned to investigate this. And they took a look at what the area looked like this is what the house looked like in 1976. So this is the house here. Here's the pool, this blank area. They think the fort was right there. Here's a copy, or here's a picture of what it looked like in 1992 before the excavation. Again, the house, the pool, now there's a tennis court right there. So here's the start of the dig, and these are some of the pictures that I was looking through of the negatives at the beginning. And they bring in a backhoe, and they bring an archaeologist over from Arizona State University, And you see they have these tripods set up to screen the earth so that they can see if there's any evidence in there. They went down 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet. Finally, at 7 feet, they find a bag. And when they open up the bag, inside is the torso of a body of a boy and legs, but no arms and no head. And if you think about it, how would you identify someone in 1978? It was done through fingerprints and through dental records. So if there's no head and no fingers, it's hard to identify that person. And those were never found of Greg Holman. So they had a story that human remains were found in this yard of the last person to see him alive. But there was no evidence of there was no murder weapon, nothing like that. But there was a brand new technology that had been invented called DNA. And they took DNA from the body and they compared it to DNA of the siblings of Greg Holman. And they sent it to the University of California to a lab to have it analyzed. Now, in 1992, it took a full year to do the analysis. But when it came back 1 year later, it said 99% likelihood that the body found was Greg Holman, but there was no evidence to link the body to John Benson. So technology finally could prove that Greg Holman was the dead body, but they couldn't prove who the murderer was. So once again, unfortunately, the case goes cold. Every couple of years, there's a story in the paper about Greg Holman being missing or that his body was found, but they still don't know what happened to him. This particular one was from 1994. And then Scottsdale created a cold case squad and assigned Detective Hugh Lockerbie, badge 707, with the assistance of retired Detective Frank Hilton. Frank Hilton was asked to assist in retirement as essentially as a volunteer. So they went back, they interviewed people, they interviewed the younger siblings of Greg's friends, and they found out something that they had never known before. First off, that John Benson was a predatory pedophile who was molesting younger children of Scottsdale, and that he had offshoot branches of his fort that he had dug specially, and apparently that's where he did some of his more evil, insidious things. So here's a photo of what the property looked like in 2006, and Detective Lockerbie and Frank Hilton and brought several other people with them, and they went to this house. The Benson family no longer owned the house. As you see, it now has, you see there's additions to the house, the pool, a playground area, a tennis court. This appears to be like a baseball, like a batting cage, or maybe just a cover, you can't really tell. And they essentially knock on the door and ask permission to go and dig up the backyard once again. So here's some pictures of them with the backhoe digging it up, finding the area. And here's some detectives going through the earth. And they were able to find that there were offshoot branches of the original fort that did have some things, but a lot of it was trash. A lot of it was things they were hoping to find, maybe the head or the hands. They were never able to find that. But by interviewing and by investigating, they were able to put together a circumstantial case. And each detective added a piece to the puzzle. Detective Borkenhagen focused on Benson, that he was definitely the bad guy, the suspect in this one. Detective Hilton, it was foul play. There wasn't a missing child 3 years after he had gone missing. Detective Vassell, the fort was the scene of the crime. And Detective Lockerbie at the sexual predator and minor victims component. And all 4 of these clues led to one person, John Benson. On October 27, 2008, Lieutenant Krasnowski announced that the Holman case was solved and they had arrested John Benson, although it wasn't too hard to find him because he had been, he was in prison at the time. He had been arrested by the Phoenix police for luring a child in a park for sexual exploitation. So he was in prison. So this is a picture of him when he was arrested in 2006. And then he was added additional time to his sentence from the murder of Greg Holman. So here's a picture of him around 2014. And this is a sex offender website photo of him around 2019. I believe he's living in the Tucson area. There's actually a television show that talks about this whole case. It's on the Investigation Discovery Channel, and it's called Murder Book, Promise Not to Tell, Season 1, Episode 9. It aired in 2015. It talks about this case and interviews the people that were involved. Rather than me just telling you about these things and asking me questions, I thought it'd be a good idea if we brought in now Lieutenant Hugh Lockerbie to take your questions as the officer who arrested John Benson.
Bruce, thank you for the opening and the incredible presentation. That was a very interesting and it was a very good presentation as to what the whole case was about. It was a very interesting case, and it was a lot of fun to work.
So let me ask you, how did you get permission to knock on the door like 20 years later and let someone go into the backyard and dig their backyard up?
Well, you know, it was a long time coming for that. We had spent Detective Hilton and I spent several months just putting together the cases, interviewing people, you know, building our case. As we worked our case and we interviewed more and more people, things started to unravel as to that there could potentially be evidence still at the residence of where John used to live. So with some guidance and a little bit of interaction with the county attorney's office, we were able to convince the police department or our bosses to say we need to, you know, go into this person's backyard and start looking for potential left evidence from this murder. We met with the homeowners at the time, explained the situation, and they were very cordial and very helpful and allowed us to do our thing. We brought in some special equipment to kind of confirm our suspicion. It's a ground penetrating radar, and that area that you saw with the blue tent or the blue awning is actual, like you described it was a baseball cage. And we focused on that area and found some anomalies in that ground penetrating radar that we felt that was undigged, or a potential hole there, or some sort of a cave, or some sort of a fort at one time. And so we were able to take all of that and get some of the city workers with the backhoe and dig it back up again.
Okay. One of the questions we just got in says, why did it take so long to put the pieces together? When was Benson arrested, and why wasn't he questioned at the time?
So he was never officially arrested until 2007. So if we were to go back into the timeline of the investigation, each piece of that investigation, whether it was in the 70s, in the 80s, there wasn't enough evidence that the detectives felt at the time to actually charge John with any type of disappearance. And I think it's important to know that during that time, during the 70s and 80s, this was, you know, we didn't have, especially in, you know, in the Phoenix metro area as much, but even definitely in Scottsdale, we didn't have kids that went missing that were suspicious, and it just wasn't heard of in that type of this type of area. And so this was kind of uncharted grounds, and we just didn't have enough evidence to really bring forth an arrest for someone that killed someone without a body, which now there's a lot more training and just a lot more evidentiary things that can go on. So it wasn't until 95-ish that they're actually had at a point where once they found Greg and they confirmed it was Greg, that they actually had an interview with John, and he didn't talk to the detectives for more than 10 or 15 minutes, and then he asked them to leave. And it was a discharging decision that we didn't have enough at that time, that we needed more. And so then that's when another 11 years passed before 2006 timeframe that Detective Hilton and I mean, sunk our teeth into this case, and put all our efforts into making sure that we were able to get enough evidence to arrest John for the crime.
Can you explain the charging limitations that you were under because of the age of the case?
Yeah, so in Arizona, there's no statute of limitations for a homicide. So, but there is statute of limitations towards certain sex crimes that occurred. 1978 was there was a change in the law. We had that, we were in that gray area. But for statute of limitations for homicide, there is none. So we were able to successfully prosecute him for the murder of Greg.
Okay. How could a person research the locations of possible crime scenes before buying a property?
A lot of that's probably going to be in public records, that you're going to be able to just open source records through, different search engines, Google, Yahoo, those type of things. Asking your realtor. There's those type of ways. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would really narrow that down, though.
Okay. When was he released from prison?
The last time John was in prison, he would have gotten out, I want to say sometime in 2014, 2015, I want to say.
And did you look to see if you could tie him to any other cases or any crimes?
We did a ton of work on that, because after John got out of high school, and in the 80s now, he lived in Mexico for a while. He lived in Tucson. He lived in Utah. He was a pilot. So we were really concerned with his whereabouts, and so we had done a lot of work with the agencies in the areas where John lived. We were never able to determine if he had done anything to any kids or anyone else in those jurisdictions. We dug into it pretty thoroughly, but there's always a possibility. We just never were able to convincingly say, yes, this person had a link to John.
What was it like interviewing people 10, 20, 30 years after a crime had come, when they were a child at the time?
It was fairly surreal. I will say that, we spent a lot of time with a lot of people, and it took many months, and it was, we went into this with a goal in mind. And when we met with each individual person, every person had definitely a story to tell. We had police officers that grew up in Scottsdale that knew about John and knew about Greg, and they expressed a lot of fear they remembered as children or as young teenagers. But there was a TV show that went on in the early 2000s, roughly right around the same time that we were working this case, and it was called Cold Case. And if you remember, the story was, they get this case, they would kind of do the same thing we did, and when they interviewed someone, they would the part of the show is they'd flash back to what the person looked like at the time of the murder, and we kind of experienced that with some of the people that we interviewed. It was, you could almost see them revert to their child or teenager like persona, and it was very interesting. I mean, you listen to a lot of the music that happened in the 70s and kind of replaced yourself into that era. And luckily for me, I was able to speak with, work with, Frank Hilton, who worked as a police officer, as a detective in the 70s in Scottsdale. So he was able to bring a lot of context to the political environment, to the, police environment, to why they did the things they did. And it was really interesting, but you definitely saw we talked to someone, you would almost see that them flash back to what they looked like, and that's the other thing too. We'd get pictures of what they would look like, what they, yearbook photos, and try to, kind of relive and kind of put themselves back into that time frame to help, bring out some memories, bring out things that could help the case.
And one last question: did Benson ever confess to the murder?
No, he never confessed. We brought him up to our interview room in 2007, 2008, and we interviewed him at length, and he never admitted, never confessed to doing anything to Greg. Had a lot of different things that he said about it. I would go to his clemency hearings when he was trying to get released from prison early, and he never admitted exactly what happened, what he did with the rest of Greg's body. Always claimed he didn't remember. So that was kind of hard for for a lot of the family members too, because they were really wanting to get some closure to that.
And did you explain already the charging of how many years he got?
Well, here's the interesting thing. So based on the sentencing guidelines that we were under, we had to use the once he pled guilty, he was sentenced. He had to be sentenced under the guidelines of what a juvenile would have been sentenced for that same type of crime in 1978. So he ended up getting 7 years for that crime of I think he pled to manslaughter, but he ended up serving 7 years in the Department of Corrections. The interesting thing about it all is if he would have admitted, hypothetically speaking, if he would have admitted to murdering Greg in the 80s when he, or even in the 70s when Detective Borkenhagen or Detective Hilton spoke with him, he would have only had to spend whatever time up until his 18th birthday. So he would have been 14, 15 at the time. So he'd have been 3 or 4 years in the juvenile facility. He would have been out. So he ended up spending more time as an adult than if he had just admitted when he was a child or a teenager. So yeah, that's what we ended up getting John sentenced for.
Well, thank you very much, Lieutenant Locker. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day, and thank you for all you do to serve the city of Scottsdale.
You're very welcome, Bruce. Thank you again for the invite, and it's been a pleasure of mine to work on these cases. Many of them I've been a part of, and I enjoy spending time finding and researching things for you, Bruce. It's always a lot of fun. It brings back a lot of memories. A lot of hard work it can definitely put in from all different levels of the police department. So I enjoy this. I appreciate this, and thank you for putting on these presentations. It's really good to allow our citizens and our community members to really get a snapshot as to the history of Scottsdale. It's really interesting. So thank you again.
Thank you again. But I hope you enjoyed our special guest. One person said, is Benson on the predator list? Yes, that's where I found the photos of him on the sex offender database. But I think you're going to find this one a very interesting story. I think they're both incredibly interesting stories. This one is, I'm going to make a statement now that is probably, you're going to say to me, I don't know if I would make that statement. That's a little grandiose. But I think if you wait till the end, you're going to say, or you're going to agree with me. this bold statement I'm going to make is that this next case not only changed police work, not only in Scottsdale, not only in Arizona, not only in the United States, but a case could be made that this one case changed police work in the world. Now, you're not going to say this when I get to the end of the first part of the story. You're just going to say, Bruce, where I came from, we had a much worse story than that. But again, just give me some time and I think you're going to agree with me. So we're going to fast forward in time from 1978 to the year 1991. Herb Drinkwater, our beloved former mayor, is currently the mayor in 1991. Scottsdale has a population of about 130,000 people, 185 square miles, and there are 300 police employees at this time. But Phoenix is 1.2 million people, so it's still 10 times the size of Scottsdale. In 1991, an interesting thing for this one, the #1 movie, the movie that won the Academy Award in 1991 was Silence of the Lambs. It beat out Beauty and the Beast, Bugsy, JFK, and The Prince of Tides. The #1 TV show was interesting because it was in its 9th season and it was still #1 or became #1. That's Cheers, where everyone knows your name. It beat out 60 Minutes, Roseanne, A Different World, and The Cosby Show. The #1 song in December 7, 1991 was Black and White by Michael Jackson, and it held the spot for the rest of the year. Now, I found an aerial to show you the area that we're going to talk about, and that is two friends grew up attending a different high school, not Saguaro. This one is up here. We have Shea Boulevard. Down here is Mountain View, and this is Scottsdale Road. The high school is Chaparral High School, and these two friends went to this school. Their names are Corey Holmes and Todd Bogers. Corey and Todd were literally big men on campus because they were also in the Chaparral football team. And they were they were a big deal. And Corey Holmes was the captain of the defense of the Chaparral High School football team. And he got like a half a page of the yearbook just dedicated to him. And it asked him, like, who's your favorite football player? And he said, Dick Butkus, because he dominates on defense. This is, why do you want to be on defense? He said, I'd rather be a hammer than a nail. Wow. These are quotes from their yearbook. Todd Bogers also has some fame or notoriety today because the year after he graduated high school, he appeared in the movie Raising Arizona. And for those of you who've attended some of our other classes, you know that Raising Arizona filmed many of their spots in Scottsdale. And Joan Fadala does a whole presentation about movies in Scottsdale, mentions Raising Arizona. So Todd Bogers was cast to play the part of Varsity Nathan Jr. Now, Nathan was the little baby, and Nicolas Cage, who played the sort of father, the father figure, I guess you'd say. He was imagining what it would be like when baby Nathan grew up. So he imagined him as Varsity Nathan Jr., this big guy played by Todd. He's in football pads. It says Arizona as if it was the University of Arizona, but the colors are of ASU. So it's sort of like this non-Arizona school. It still has a cult following. You can find out lots of stuff about it on the internet. If you say, search like movie locations of Raising Arizona, it'll show you where it filmed different parts in Scottsdale and other parts of the valley. So Todd and Corey, 1991, had graduated, and in this time they were working at a health club in Scottsdale as trainers. And Todd had planned to go to college in the fall, and Corey was still working on what he was going to do in the fall. They went to a bar that night. The night we're talking about is December 7th, 1991. And they were there with a group of friends, about 10 different friends who, you know, not the best of friends, but certainly they knew each other. They're all acquaintances. They hung out together. And one of them, at 1 o'clock, when the bar was closing, one of them got a a call or a page, or somehow she was notified that a group of friends were over at the Hyatt-Gainey Ranch, and all these 10 friends were invited to come down and join them. So they relayed that message, and everyone jumped in their cars and decided to go to the Hyatt-Gainey Ranch down Scottsdale Road. So they're in Scottsdale Road, they're in the car. Here's Todd Bogers and Corey Holmes in Todd's car, and then an unknown suspect in a white car comes up behind them. And the car behind them does some very aggressive driving. It looks something like this. It tries to force them off the road. It passes them and then pushes them off the road. And it turned out that both cars were going to the same place. They were both going to the Hyatt-Gainey Ranch. Now, there's the Hyatt-Gainey Ranch, and you see the water that's around it. That's where they do the gondola rides. And they were both heading to the south parking lot. The north parking lot above this one right here, is now a multi-level parking garage. But back then it was just called the north lot and the south parking lot. So let's zoom in a second. Here they are in the south parking lot. They pull in. They get out of the car, and this is Todd's 1987 Chevy Camaro. And they sort of approach this guy, and they're yelling, they're mad. They just almost run off the road. They felt like their lives were in danger, and who was this guy to do this? And they charge at the guy, and the guy yells, get back, and then he pulls out a gun and he opens fire. I have removed the bodies from this and just put the chalk outlines just out of honor to the victims and their families, so that we're not showing that. But you can see this is where Corey's car is, and the two outlines of where the bodies were. And you see how close they were to the Hyatt-Gainey Ranch, so that it had not been 1 a.m. People could have been in danger from the gunfire. They got the friends who were there in the parking lot waiting for Corey and Todd to walk over. They saw the person from a distance, and they spoke to the police department, and they gave a description. They said that the car appeared to be a white, either 1990 Camry or 1990 Mazda MX-6. They described the suspect as a white male, 5'10", 175 pounds, medium build and a thin waist, and he had short, dark, wavy hair. And the families and other people put up a $50,000 reward and started passing this flyer around, trying to find who had done this, because the suspect got into his car and drove away after shooting the two. After 2 years, nothing had happened. So the police department decided to try an extraordinary thing. They put up billboards around the valley, and I believe the family helped with this, and the media helped with this, to put billboards around, 20 different billboards around the valley with the picture of the composite sketch and the $50,000 reward for the murder in 1991. Many of the phone calls that came in at this time were something like, hey, you need to look at my boyfriend. I don't know where he was that night, but he's no longer my boyfriend, and I think he's pretty suspicious, so you should go check him out. And a detective would be assigned, and they'd verify that the person had an alibi or seen by numerous people, and then they go on to the next one. And they got hundreds of tips this way from not only the flyer for originally, but these billboards, talking like 100, 200 of these flyers, of these tips that police officers have to run down. Then nothing has happened. So later in 1993, two Scottsdale detectives, Detective Scott Reed and Don Bellendier, go on America's Most Wanted, that same show when we're talking about Adam Walsh in the beginning in the first one. They go on America's Most Wanted, and actors recreate the homicide of Todd and Corey. And more tips get called in, and each time a detective has to be assigned and check out the tip and see if the person was really where he said he was. And again, nobody is arrested. The following year, they go on the #1 show, daytime show. That was the Oprah Winfrey Show. And they again recreate the whole thing, and again asking for anyone to call in tips, anyone to know about this. person. Then they show the composite sketch. They show the description of the car. They have no idea what happened to the car, what happened to anything, what happened to the gun. It's all a mystery. And then there was no arrest until 4 years later. An informant calls the Scottsdale police and says, you need to look at my former boyfriend, Kevin Osborne. Why should we look at Kevin Osborne? Well, 3 weeks after the shooting, he told me that he was the one who killed those two boys in 1991. He said, well, why didn't you call us earlier? And she said, well, we were dating at the time and he kept saying he was going to turn himself in, but he never did. And we broke up, and now I found out he's engaged to be married to someone else, and I think he doesn't deserve to have his life. He needs to, to see that there needs to be some justice for these families. So they looked at Kevin Osborne. Kevin Osborne had a track record of, he had already been arrested for an assault. He was a very unusual thing. He owned a white 1984 Honda Accord at the time, and then he repainted it shortly thereafter, and then sold it to a person in another state. And he would borrow the car from his girlfriend. He also, later on in the investigation, they found out that he told a friend of his that he had a gun that he wanted to discard. So he asked him, since the friend was driving to Las Vegas, would he take apart the gun piece by piece and throw it out the window every 100 or so miles, a different piece, to get rid of the weapon. Based on this and a lot of other facts and a lot of investigation, they were able to put together a case, and Kevin Osborne was arrested for the crime. He went before the court, and Judge Skelly said that Osborne had all the traits of a psychopath. He was found guilty for 2 counts of manslaughter and got 30 years in prison. In fact, here's a picture of him in prison, taken about 3 or 4 years ago. A lot of people will look at that picture and say, that looks a lot like Robert Fisher. That he looks a lot like Robert Fisher. At this time, he was 6'1" and 195. I checked about a week ago, and here's a picture of what he looks like now. He is now 6'1", 225, so he's put on, or 219, so he's put on some weight in prison. And it appears that he is going to have served his time and be released in the year 2022, on August 9th, is what it currently says. It also says that Kevin Osborne has had more than 45 disciplinary infractions during his time in prison, including disorderly conduct, theft, possession of stolen property, harassment, disobeying a verbal or written order, assault on an inmate, assault on a staff, extortion, intimidation, and many, many more. It goes on and on and on. His most recent discipline was as recently as January 5th, 2021, for disobeying a written verbal order. He was up for parole in the year 2010 and was denied. Now is part where you say, okay, how does this change police work? Now we're going to get to that part. So this case had lasting effects not only on the victims and their families, but on the whole community and on the Scottsdale Police Department. When I talked to Detective Scott Reed, he told me that every year he gets a phone call from Corey Holmes' dad, not on the anniversary of his son's death, on the anniversary of Kevin Osborne getting arrested. And he just checks in with Detective Reed and tells him to thank him for all that he did for his son, and to let him know that the families, they're very sad, but they're getting by. So for Detective Reed, it said that he told me that it had this feeling that he was happy that there was closure, but he had worked on this case for 3 years and then was transferred to another unit, so he never had his closure. There was other people in the community that had similar issues or similar problems, or just problems because of this case. One of them's name is Patrick Smith. He went by Pat as in high school, but he's now Rick Smith. He attended Chaparral High School. He's 2 years younger than Corey and Todd. He played on the football team. He certainly would have known of Corey and Todd because they were legends of height of chaparral football. After the death, his mother said, "I don't feel safe anymore, because if this could happen to those two boys at the Hayakini Ranch, it could happen to me. It could happen to anyone, anywhere. I need something to feel safe." So he went out and he bought his mother a dog. And she said, "I can't take a dog everywhere. I need something that's going to make me feel safe." So he went out and bought her pepper spray. And she said, "Now I'm going to spray this in my face. I don't need pepper spray. I need something that'll make me feel safe." So he went out and bought her a gun. She said, "Now I'm going to shoot myself. I don't need a gun. I need something to make me feel safe." So he and his brother started doing research, and they found a product. They didn't invent the product, but they created a company to market the product. And his mother felt safe. And a lot of other people started feeling safe, including police officers in the military. In fact, here he is getting an award from Arizona State University for the Spirit of Enterprise BBVA Compass Innovation in Entrepreneurship Award. Whew, say that 3 times fast. And that's his mom next to him where he's getting that award, because the personal safety product that he marketed was Taser. He and his brother started the Taser company, originally called Air Taser, and then it was called Taser. And recently, they've switched, a couple of years ago, they switched to on-body cameras. So they're now go by the name Axon. As I said, they didn't invent the product. It was actually invented by Jack Cover, a former NASA scientist, who after he retired from NASA, came up with this idea. This is a picture of him with the original Taser. See, the original one, the problem was to shoot the darts out, it used gunpowder. So the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms declared it the same thing as a sawed-off shotgun. So police and military could not use it. So Jack Cover, when he was meeting with Rick and his brother Tom, they came up with this idea. Well, he suggested air and using compressed air, and then they came up with something else. So when it was compressed air, they first called the company Air Taser. And then they came up with nitrogen, compressed nitrogen, and then they just switched to Taser. Now you may say, why Taser? Well, his favorite book was Tom Swift and his electric rifle. So he took the letters from Thomas Swift, which is Thomas A. Swift, or TAS, and his electric rifle, ER, or Taser. And from that, once they went to compressed nitrogen, and they started to sell their product to the public and to the police and to the military, it just took off. In fact, if you were to invest $10,000 in the year 2004 in Taser stock on January 1st and hold it for just 1 year and then sell it, if you do that, that original $10,000, you would now have $620,000 in 1 year. Wow. There's so many more stories about Taser that I can't go into right now. I will tell you quickly that the company's traded on NASDAQ. In 2017, its revenue was $343 million, and it had 1,115 employees. So to me, it's definitely a shocking success story. Well, sometimes I get asked, did Kevin Osborne ever admit to this? And the answer is no, he never did. He believed that in his mind, he was being pursued by Todd and Corey. He felt that something happened he was at the bar that they were at before they went over to the Hayakini Ranch. So he thought they were following him. From Scottsdale Citizen Service, the department I work in now, all these people who helped the Scottsdale Public Library, Kelly Horton and Richard Howley, who's since retired, Scottsdale historian Joan Fadala. From the police department, all of these current and retired detectives and officers who helped me, or employees of the Scottsdale Police Department who helped me get all this information so I could present it to you today. That's me. I'm Bruce Wall. I'm a citizen advisor for the city of Scottsdale. I like to call myself Scottsdale's historical storyteller. I hope you enjoyed our presentation.